Hello everybody, this is Jeremy with the DAW. Welcome back. It has been a long time and I've been very busy. I've been out of town, I've been doing events. I now do a bunch of live sound events at a bunch of really nice high-end venues and a bunch of stuff outside. Next month I think I'm going to be out of town for about 2 weeks just doing corporate events and recording a bunch of sessions. But today I want to start with announcing that we are now officially doing hardware videos with this channel. And what I mean by that is we are going to be doing deep dives into stuff. I know a lot of people have been wanting to see when we're going to be doing the video on the studio channels here. Those are coming up next. But for now, we're going to be checking out the Xtomp Mini from Hotone. Now, this is a really cool little guitar pedal that essentially is using some really cool and powerful circuit modeling technology to emulate anything you want this to. So you can make this be a tube screamer, you can make this be a blues overdrive, you can make this be an octave pedal, a wah pedal, you can make this be an Engl amp head, and then you can get a second one and make that be the Engl amp cabinet. And that's what I'm going to do today. I want to take a look at the amp heads and cabinets for a couple of really popular high gain amplifiers and see how they sound compared to something like the 11 rack, which I have down here in the bottom of the cabinet. And the reason for that is because there are a ton of videos showing off how good this thing is at emulating distortion pedals, reverbs, delays, but there's not a lot of videos showing you how they sound as a standalone amplifier. A lot of home studio people don't have the budget or the time or the space to use microphones on a cabinet. I personally have about maybe $15,000 worth of microphones, a lot of dynamics, a lot of condensers, a lot of ribbons, and it took me a long time to learn how to mic up a cabinet. Whereas someone who's starting out might not have enough money to buy a nice interface, 2 or 3 mics, and then a decent amplifier. They might just have a practice amp, maybe a 1 or 2 channel interface, and they don't really have a lot of time. So what I want to do in this video is really see, do these sound good, and are they comparable to something like the 11 rack? The 11 rack is a really old piece of gear, but you can still buy them used for about $200 to almost $400 online used, and that is ridiculous, especially considering that you can buy an Xtomp Mini on sale for Black Friday for $70, which is what I did. I have 2 of these, so even if I bought 2 of these, it would only cost about $140 to $160. And the 11 rack that I got cost me $250, I believe. That is still cheaper than the 11 rack. And as you're going to hear in these examples, this sounds way better. So let's jump in and take a look. All right, you guys, so as you see right here, I have 2 Hotone Xtomp Minis. Now, this one right here is brand new. I just bought it from a retailer, and that means that this was paid full price. This one right here on the left is a used one that I purchased a few months ago. There was a big issue with the purchasing because it was used. They sent it to the wrong address, so I had to wait several months to get it in. So what I did is I just went to a store and bought this one. Now, one big thing that you will notice is that I have to have 2 Xtomps, and the reason for that is because I'm using the Minis. The Minis only have a mono input and a mono output, and that also means that it's not capable of having the cabinet emulation on one of the outputs like the big full-on Xtomp. The Xtomp Mini basically has a slightly stripped down form factor, so you have less features. Whereas the full Xtomp will have a stereo input, which can be mono or stereo, and a stereo output. And if you have a amp emulation, it's going to have the head and then the cabinet at the very end on one of the outputs, and then the other output will have just the head without the cabinet. So what I'm doing is loading up the cabinet on the second one and the head on the first one. Another thing I'm doing is I am showing you guys the controls and the effects that we're loading up using the desktop app right here. This is just going to be a lot easier to do than filming my Android phone. So what I'm doing right now is having this set up to a Marshall JCM 800 with a matching cabinet. So what we have is this one right here. If I go to my favorites, I have the Marshall JCM 800. And so that means the first Xtomp is the Marshall head, and you see the controls right here. We have presence, master volume, preamp, bass, middle, treble. The second one has the Marshall or the Marshall 4x12. And that has the output and the presence knob. Presence is essentially going to give you almost like a microphone, how you can bring up the presence by shifting the axis. And that's mostly because the Xtomp doesn't have the capability to emulate the microphone's position like the Ampero would. I really do want to check out the Ampero because I'm really, really impressed by the Xtomp Mini. But without any further delay, let's just check out how it sounds. Everything's set to noon, so this is essentially stock sounds. Now that actually doesn't sound bad. I think that sounds pretty good. It's a little bit dark for my personal taste, but this is definitely a very good tone, and I like the response. Check out what happens when I do something like some pinch harmonics. And just for comparison's sake, let's check out the stock emulation of the 11 rack that I'm using. And what we're going to do is load up the JCM 800 on that and set it up to be stock settings. This will automatically give me a matched cab, and we have a SM57 on this. Sounds kind of thin, right? Let's try the Xtomp Mini with just the amp head. This is the same amp, the Marshall JCM 800. That's a pretty big difference. Let's check it out with the cabinet emulation activated. Now we have a volume drop, so we're going to bring up the output. Now I do notice that the Xtomp Mini's output signal is significantly quieter. That's actually because I have to watch out for the digital clipping into the 11 rack. The 11 rack is a pretty old piece of gear, and it is a digital piece of gear, so the inputs may be analog, but it has to go through a conversion chip. So because of that, I cannot hit this very hard with the Xtomp Mini, whereas the cabinet and amp emulation inside of the 11 rack don't have that problem because it's all in the digital realm. They can be as loud as they want. Because if I did the Xtomp Minis straight into a DI input, it would sound really cool and I could get it as loud as I want. Now, this actually leads me to wanting to check out the Ampero because I've been watching a lot of videos on the Ampero, and from what I understand, they have a newer technology than the Xtomps. It's just using a slightly more advanced form, basically the next level of the same technology, but done in a much more modern way, and it has way more processing power because one Ampero can have 9 modules or something like that, whereas the Xtomp Mini only has 1 effect that it can have, and the big Xtomp has 2 that it can have. So that's how the Marshall sounds. I'm going to take away the 11 rack control software. The next thing I want to do is check out 3 more amp and cab emulations that I really like on the Xtomp Mini. So what I'm going to do is change it up and try the Diezel VH. That is this one right here, and now you can see the controls. We're going to have gain, presence, volume, treble, middle, bass. So it is going to be quite different. So I'm going to zero this out once again, and on my phone I'm going to sync up to the amp head of my Xtomp Mini, the first one, and I'm going to pair that with the Diezel, hit load device, and if I show you really quickly, it's just right here loading up. And as you see, it's done. Very quick, very easy. The next step is to connect to the cabinet. And before we do that, let's actually listen to the Diezel head on the Marshall cab. I love that. You are hearing a gate on this. I have my 11 rack utilizing a noise gate just so we can get rid of some fret buzz and stuff like that. I do have a pretty big setup right now because I'm using a headset mic. I have my headphones on. I have my guitar here. I have like 5 or 6 lights and then my camera. So I needed this to get rid of some of the excess noise. But you'll notice that the Diezel has a much more modern, aggressive tone to it, and I really dig it. So the next step for me is going to be loading up a Diezel cabinet. That is the Diezel 4x12 right here. Just hit load device. Something I have noticed about the Xtomp Mini is it's very responsive to your playing. It's almost as if each one is listening to the output of the other and kind of configuring itself to that. That's just speculation. I haven't really done any type of research about that, but that's one big thing that made the 11 rack a huge deal back in the day. It would automatically detect the impedance of the cable and the guitar. I feel like the Xtomp Mini is doing something similar to that because it is definitely responding very realistically and in a much more advanced way than the 11 rack does. Now, this isn't bashing the 11 rack. I love the 11 rack. That's why I own it, but that's also why I bought 2 of these Xtomp Minis. Let's check out the controls. We have gain, presence, volume, treble, mids, and bass. Let's bring up the gain, bring down the volume. Let's bring up a little bit of presence. Bring up some mids and drop down some lows. And I automatically forgot that this is using a different configuration. So the treble's on this side and the bass is on this side. I really like the way that the Diezel sounds. Now, the next step for me is I want to check out how this sounds with some time-based effects. So I'm going to activate the modulation, delay, and reverb on my 11 rack, and let's just see how it sounds. Going on to the next one. For this one, let's keep the Diezel cabinet and let's check out the power Engl lead, which is obviously a Engl. So we're going to do the Engl style amp head. It is loaded up. That sounds really cool. Let's check out what we can do for the controls. We have gain, presence, master, bass, middle, and treble. So let's bring up the treble, bring up the mids, bring down the bass, and let's leave everything else how it was. I really dig that. I am hearing a little bit more compression on this one, so I'm going to dial back the compressor that I have on my 11 rack. I have the built-in compressor on it to prevent any sort of distortion or clipping. Much better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to obviously gain match that so you don't hear the big issue with that. So let us see how this sounds with the Engl 412 right here. As you see, they all have the exact same control as far as the cabinets. Let's load the device. Now, instantly, I'm hearing a much different tone out of this thing. So I'm going to bring up the output. Let's bring down the presence, the treble, mids, and bring up the lows. And let's just see how this sounds now. Cool, I'm going to bring up my master output, bring up my presence a touch, bring up the mids and the highs, and leave the low end as it is. So let's take a listen to it. I'm actually going to bring up a little bit more mids and a little bit more treble. I dig it. It has a much more aggressive tone. I want to see what happens when I bring up the presence on the cabinet emulation. And one thing that I really notice when I'm using the Xtomp Mini is that I don't lose definition. One huge issue I've had with the 11 rack and one enormous issue I have with amp simulations or plugins, especially plugins, is that in the higher gain settings, you lose a lot of definition and you lose a lot of tone. You're not able to really hear the strings being hit. You just hear like a random amalgamation of noise. So the next thing to do is basically zero out this thing. The next step is let's check out the dual rectifier. Now, this is a classic amp head and one that I've used a billion times in real life. I love the dual rectifier. So let's load up the dual rectifier cabinet. It's a very simple thing. Just hit load and I'm done. Let's sync up to the power angle, which is the first Xtomp Mini. The cabinet sounds really good, by the way, on the Engl, but let's check out the dual rectifier. That sounds pretty good. So this is a recreation of the Mesa Boogie dual rectifier Channel 3 Modern. So this is going to have a very tight sound and a very recognizable sound. I've actually been doing shootouts lately because I had a session recently where I recorded a real dual rectifier with the matching cab. And I took those tracks and we took a DI and I reamped the DI through the Xtomp Minis and I got a really usable tone. It was almost the same. The real thing has a little bit more chunky low end and a little bit more extended detail on the high end. But the way that I recorded that was utilizing my Cascade Fathead, my 12 gauge microphones, Blue 12, which is a cardioid condenser with a pad, and then I had the Mini K47 from Roswell Pro Audio, and I just used those and blended those in to get a very, very good sound. So that was using a lot of microphones and a lot of money, whereas this is 2 guitar pedals. Now for this, I feel like I want to bring up the gain. In fact, give me all the gain. Let's see how that sounds. Pretty cool. I really like how tight this sounds. It has a very tight sound to it. So what I'm going to do is actually bring up the low end and the mids, bring up some presence, and bring down the high end. I just wanted to get more ballsiness out of it. So let's bring down the presence, bring up the highs just a touch, and bring up the lows a little bit more. And that's a perfect example right there of when I'm talking about detail. Listen to how every note is very detailed. I love it. So I also want to check out seeing what happens if I dull out the cabinet. Cool. And then the next step is I'm going to actually get my Tube Screamer emulation that I have on the 11 racks input, and I'm going to crank the drive. I have it set to basically no drive, but I'm going to have it set it to noon. And let's listen to it now. I dig the aggressive tone. So now I'm going to open up the 11 rack editor one more time. And we're going to bypass the distortion pedal, which is just a Tube Screamer. And that's what that sounds like. Let's turn on the pedal again. Let's see if we can push this with something like the Black Op distortion. And that's what I mean by it's very responsive. Did you notice that when I changed the distortion, the entire response changed? It was really good. Anyway, this has been a really long video. I'm probably going to have to cut this up to be a lot shorter because I was really hoping to keep this under 20 minutes. Overall, the Xtomp Mini is amazing. I highly recommend grabbing at least 2 Xtomp Minis. But for the price, I'm going to honestly say that I think it's worth it to get an Ampero if it has the same technology and the same sound quality as the Xtomp Mini and the Xtomp, because the Xtomp brand new is about $225, give or take. And buying 2 of those is the same price as buying an Ampero. Now, I have not tried the Ampero out yet. I am really hoping to get my hands on one because if it sounds anything like this, I am totally just going to throw away my 11 rack. And by throw away, I mean I'm going to sell it. It responds a lot more like a real amp, and it definitely sounds a lot more like a real amplifier. And I hope you enjoyed this little look at some of the high gain amplifiers. The reason why I started off with high gain amplifiers is because there is a ton of people doing videos showcasing a Line 6 Helix or showcasing how they have their really nice Mesa Boogie and how they mic it up. But there's not a lot of people showing you how you can get a decent sounding high gain amplifier with something as cheap as an Xtomp Mini. Now, whatever technology they're using is extremely impressive. I did 0 post-processing, so that means everything you're hearing is raw. But everything that I've heard in the demos that I recorded sound pretty decent. They actually sound very usable and they're very easy to tweak. I love how smooth and seamless changing something like the EQ and the presence is on this thing. You don't hear any stepping, you don't hear any artifacts. It's just very smooth and clean. And this also makes me really want to know, what does the Ampero sound like? Because the Ampero is utilizing a much more advanced form of their circuit modeling technology that Hotone used for the Xtomp and the Xtomp Mini. And it has so much more DSP processing that you can have something like an impulse loader, an amplifier, a reverb, a distortion pedal, whatever, all in line, and then you can have a very clean output that way. So for the next video that I'm going to be doing on the Xtomp Mini, we're going to be checking out some of the boutique amplifiers and cabinets. And then we're going to be checking out the distortion pedals, the compressors, the noise gates, the wah filters, the octave pedals. So what I want you to do is tell me, what do you want to see next? After checking this out, I kind of want to sell my 11 rack, and that's not because I'm paid to do this video or anything like that. I paid for these. It's just these things sound so much better, and it has such a small footprint that it makes me want to know what the bigger version can do. This is Jeremy with In the DAW. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.